Welcome all to the Montana Chamber Capital Connection. We are up a hill today, so we're quite slightly different location. No table to hide behind here for me, but I'm Sheridan Hoyer. I'm the Government Relations Specialist here at the Chamber.
I'm Todd O'Hare, President and CEO of Montana Chamber.
And I'm Kerry Hagerberg, a contract lobbyist working with the Browning, Kawazak, Berry, and Hoven law firm. And I've been doing quite a bit of work with the chamber.
Kerry's been on all sides of the table on most of these issues, and we're grateful to have him on the team. What are we looking at, Todd?
We're down to the kind of crunch here. I think this legislative session is supposed to conclude sometime around the 1st of May. We're into the official part of the, halfway through the month of April. The legislature is continuing to clear the decks on a variety of sort of bills to neck this thing down to a handful of bills, which will be some of the biggest sort of debates and discussions on over the course of the remaining 2 or 3 weeks of this legislative session. But in the meantime, as we're helping try to clear those decks on various bills, tax increment finance districts, we went in, made that a priority, try to hold that economic development tool in place for local governments. There's 2 bills related to TIF districts that remain that essentially make the inflation rate increase that these local governments can operate under. And there's a bit of a deal that's made. We expect both those to kind of move along and to be okay. And so all of the problematic, for the most part, tax increment finance bills have been tabled or improved and passed along. So that's good on the TIF front.
And was not nearly as aggressive as we
No.
expected coming in.
No, we were kind of expecting this to be kind of a full court press on TIFs. It's been considered a bit of a leakage point for property taxes. I don't think that's accurate, but that's kind of the main talking point when you talk about TIF districts. And so they didn't have nearly the firepower going into this session as we were expecting. The other one that we made a big priority is because there's nobody out there that is willing to take this sort of an issue on. It has to do with the Public Service Commission, and we went in support of a bill that would change the current Public Service Commission so that it's, instead of it being 5 elected officials overseeing investment in our regulated utilities, to making it a 3 appointment by the governor, 2 elected sort of a role. And our argument has been that frankly, when you think about those of you that engage in elections and are kind of respected amongst your colleagues and your peers and your family, you more than likely receive 2 kinds of phone calls. One is, who should I vote for the Montana Supreme Court, and who should I vote for Public Service Commission? And as a result of that, I think our Public Service Commission makes decisions not based upon a full set of experts analyzing what long-term investment should be in the state. And you see candidates running and winning in those elections that tend to be name ID candidates only. They're winning based upon their name ID. And I think if we're going to have a serious energy investment in the state long-term, we need at least some number of individuals on the Public Service Commission that have some sort of relevant expertise in either energy or investment or finance or banking, so that we can look at those sort of investments. And well, we got the bill out of the Senate pretty handily. We got stuck over in the House today at a House committee, and the bill was tabled. And so we'll be looking at trying to build a coalition for that next year, hopefully.
Not for lack of trying.
That's right.
Kerry's giggling over here.
That was kind of a lonely
Endeavor.
a lonely endeavor for sure. And everybody in the business community always counts on the chamber to come and help them. But
Right.
when the chamber needs help, sometimes we don't have anybody behind us. But we did get a lot of mileage out of an investment firm that did an analysis of Northwest Energy and concluded that the Montana Public Service Commission is the Beth Dutton
Yeah.
of regulatory entities across the United States, and made many analogies to the Big Sky Country being kind of like the movie or the show Yellowstone in terms of how our Public Service Commission functions. So I think the message that we took away from this morning is that there's more groundwork to be laid and a little
Yep.
more research to be done and make the case at a later date.
And I think, for us, this largely rises is like the sole entity that carries this sort of effort forward, because you take a look at a lot of the other associations, trade groups in the state of Montana, right? They're pretty narrowly sort of focused, and we're probably one of the few association types that's looking at the economy as a whole. And how do we improve the business climate in the state as a whole, rather than just how do we improve the climate for, contractors or bankers or miners or cowboys or what it is. We're looking at kind of a much bigger sort of a picture. And so there's times that we end up carrying the flag by ourselves. So anyway, we can move on from that, and
There you go.
Sheridan can cover a couple of things that would continue to push on.
Yeah, I'll hit some of our other priorities. Some of those workforce bills we were supporting have been sailing through. On childcare, we did support Senate Bill 321. It's up for a hearing tomorrow morning. That is the tax credit package for folks who are childcare workers and for businesses who are supporting childcare in some way. That's the part we really care about. I got to go to a conference on workforce policy lately, so I'm learning a lot more about all of those things, and we're on the right track. We'll see. There's still that fundamental debate on whether or not childcare should be a public good or a private responsibility. And I think from the chamber's perspective, we think that it's a bit of a broken market and needs some sort of jumper cables, maybe not continued investment forever, but some sort of jumper cables to make sure that folks can get to work. And so looking at a couple different mechanisms, the other one on that is Senate Bill 565. It's a big trust bill for an investment of about $150 million one-time funding. I would be happy. It also allows for private funds to go into that. So I would be happy if no appropriation passed, but the mechanism passed. So in the interim, if somebody was interested in putting money into that trust fund for childcare grants, then it could happen. That language was also adopted into House Bill 924, which is a huge trust bill sponsored by Representative Lou Jones, and that will come into play in our conversation a little bit later on our tax discussion. But we ended up not going in on that simply because that trust bill, while there are some good ideas, we probably shouldn't be putting $1 billion into a sort of trust fund or different trust funds in our general fund when we still have yet to see what the property tax relief looks like. And then our natural resource bills are still moving along. No big problems there. If you're interested, I can give you those numbers. On tort reform, the asbestos litigation bill, we expected to have an unfriendly amendment that would have kind of created more problems than we solved with the initial bill. And so we ended up pulling that last minute, although we did work it pretty hard. We didn't want to create more problems for some of our members. So we'll take another whack at that in later sessions. But public nuisance, 791, redefining public nuisance, which means that you can't sue because your cars that you made are too easy to steal, things like that, did pass on third reading over this weekend. And some other things in the works there, but those aren't really priorities at this point. We are back into the tax conversation, but we did have Carrie working on a couple really important bills for employers.
Speaking of lonely positions, yeah, there was a bill that came into the Senate that was highly punitive, dealing with E-Verify. As originally introduced, it would have allowed anonymous complaints to be filed against any employer for alleged hiring of illegal aliens. We expressed strong opposition to the bill. That it was amended in the Senate to take out the anonymous reporting and reduced the owner's fines, but the bill passed out of the Senate, went over to the House. They did leave the provisions that assign enforcement to the Attorney General, as opposed to the Montana Department of Labor that most of you are familiar with dealing on employment-related issues. We felt that was inappropriate and costly. And the bill still allowed for some pretty invasive activity on the part of the Attorney General's office to come into your business, interview any and all employee, any mid-level, low-level manager, and required investigation of an alleged complaint. The bill went to the floor and it failed 49-50. And again, there weren't other business groups helping. It was it's everybody's problem, so it's nobody's problem, and it becomes the chamber's problem. But it really showed the value of having a general business organization like the chamber that's looking out for the big picture stuff and not, styrofoam cups and stuff.
I think,
So-
and this is a great example, I think we can all be supportive of a rational, reasonable sort of immigration policy for the United States. But some of these issues have become nationalized here on the local level. And our job has been to how do we make sure that we have legislation that's in place, that's reasonable, that is not hard on Montana businesses. And so sometimes we run into some real frustration with legislators when we're working on this, because in their mind, right, this is all about illegal immigration and employers should be drawn and quartered if they employ someone. And our role has always been, look, there is a moderate sort of position that can be had here that allows us to be supportive of a legal immigration process without being onerous and putting too much burden on the Montana business community. Good way to summarize that.
Well said. Yeah.
Right? And so we run into a lot of that where there's folks that will try to nationalize issues, and it sounds good to them, but the business community is the ones that are left having to implement or apply or comply with some of these rules and regulations.
Well, the immigration bills are a lot like gun bills, a lot of legislators want to go back home during election time and say they voted, to protect Second Amendment rights, or they voted to make employers accountable for hiring illegal aliens. And the devil's in the details on all of those issues. And
Right.
we've seen some very onerous bills introduced that would make it difficult, if not impossible, for employers to comply.
Right. We on to taxes?
I think so. To set a little bit of the stage, as a reminder, tax has been the topic of the session, but we have yet to see what exactly it will be. As a note, the Democrat proposal was House Bill 155 that was carried by Mark Thane. It included some flat rate homestead, comstead exemptions and some other changes that the Democrats favored. House Bill 231 is carried by Representative Lou Jones, and it has homestead, comstead exemptions as a percentage of your value of your home, or the first percent value of your business. We've been in a tricky spot on that one, particularly because of the bifurcated rate. We don't want to go down the road of splitting commercial property, and there's so many pages of that bill we can get into. And then Senate Bill 90 was Carl Glim's bill at the beginning of the session that we did oppose, because it took all of the tourism money that went to the Department of Commerce and stripped anything for, especially like our local chambers, convention and visitor bureaus. However, it was amended to take that money and keep it in the Department of Commerce budget for tourism, and the rest of that lodging and rental car tax would go to property tax relief, which is not a huge amount of money at that point. So those are the kind of numbers we're still working with. There's a couple other titles out there. But those are the basics before we get into the politics of it all.
Yeah, and I'll just say, and some of you may have heard me say this before, and this is like the position that we're in as an organization. We have very large members and we have very small members. And our position throughout this entire legislative session has been that we cannot be supportive of any bill that gives property tax relief to a certain class of property taxpayers at the expense of a different class of property taxpayers. And as 231 is written now, which is one of the last remaining vehicles to provide property tax relief in the state of Montana, as it is written today, property tax for business owners will come as a result of raising property taxes on larger employers in the state of Montana. And that's a bit of the system that we're stuck in with property tax, is that the only way that you can provide property tax relief to carry is Todd will have to pay more.
That's okay with me.
Right?
But with the stipulations that some of our politicians have set that we
Right.
will not touch.
We have, as a state, we have put ourselves in a bit of a box and saying that we're not going to use general fund money to help lower property tax. And so that's the pie that we're working in. And the only way that you can give this group of folks over here a little bigger piece of the pie is to take away from the piece of pie that these folks over here have. And this is going to get really contentious. It is already very contentious. It's going to get a lot more contentious as we go forward. And we still maintain that it's like, look, if we're going to have real property tax relief, we need to consider different options other than making another group pay for property tax relief for this group. And at the chamber, we have always been a big supporter and a big believer that we want all sizes of businesses to operate in this state. We need small businesses, we need medium-sized businesses, and we need large businesses in this state. And from a policy perspective and from a practical perspective, going to those large employers in the state and saying, you have to pay more so that we can give these folks here property tax relief is not something that we can be supportive. So I don't know what's going to come of this over the course of the next 2 weeks, but as we noted at the beginning, right, we're getting down to like, this is going to be the defining issue of the remaining weeks of the legislative session is what's going to happen with regard to property tax, because every legislator that is here today, this was like the #1 issue that they heard when they were campaigning last November. You have to do something about property taxes. So the pressure is on these legislators. They do not want to go home unless they can figure out some way to be able to say, we have provided property tax relief. So that in a nutshell, right? And Sheridan's really good at being able to like make a nutshell even tighter, is kind of what I think where we're at here.
Yeah, and as an explainer a little bit, I didn't know much about property taxes coming into this session, but part of that is if we lower the rate on just a portion of commercial property taxes, then that shift in commercial property taxes gets to those higher businesses that have more than that certain value in property tax market value, right? The taxable value. And then a lot of large members and a lot of our infrastructure companies in the state, the folks that have railways and telecom and pipelines and electrical generation, all of those things that are essential for business and infrastructure as part of our strategic plan, those are classed differently. Those are not class 4 property, and those really do get shifted even more so.
They'll just pass that through, right?
Right, and so that's, you might get a reduced property tax, but if your energy bill shoots through the roof, whether you're,
Right.
then does it really make a difference in your books as a business?
At the end of the day, and I articulated this in an op-ed that went out a week ago, and that is that we're at a point here in this state that we're going to have a different conversation around property taxes. Our tax structure is a structure that we've had since the beginning of time. We are a dramatically different economy than we were in 1965 and we are today. This pressure around property taxes is only going to continue to grow with time unless we have a different conversation and have a more honest conversation about the economy that we're going to have 10 years from now versus the economy we had 30 years ago. So we'll see what shakes out here. We're pretty solid in our position and saying it's like we're not going to be supportive of anything that provides property tax relief at the expense of others paying more. So
I might just add that it's those largest companies left paying the business equipment tax as well.
That's
And
right.
in many cases, the same businesses are the ones left paying business equipment tax and the higher commercial property tax rate. And in some cases, they're the most vulnerable businesses of the state when you look at some of the natural resource industries that we've lost.